Good evening, church. Good evening. And I want to thank Reverend Bodrick for that kind introduction. And for all the talk of my baller days. Thank you, Pastor Gerald. I lost that crossover a long time ago. But on the subject of ballers, I want to give it up for the players on the former Georgia Senator Kelly Loeffler's WNBA team, who all showed up wearing Vote Warnock t-shirts. Some of you know what I'm talking about. I can't tell you what an honor, what a privilege it is to be with you today. I listened to the history of 12th Baptist Church, the people who sat in these pews, who stood at this pulpit, the very own Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm overwhelmed. I had some things I was going to say. I don't even know that I can much remember. I am so overwhelmed by this moment. I accept the recognition in this award only in the name of the people of your law firm, the Attorney General's office. We call ourselves the people's lawyer. It is our privilege to serve all of you and the people of this state. And speaking of the people's law firm, we miss Reverend Bodrick big time. Oh, can you imagine? Can you imagine what he was like? Starting our community outreach organization around the state, visiting churches, talking to kids in school, YMCAs, senior centers, even, preaching civil rights, preaching consumer protection, preaching even how to deal with those nasty robocalls. Oh, Willie, you came into a room, you captured everyone, and you inspired all 600 people in that office who continue to work hard and live on with your inspiration. I'm amazed, but not surprised at all that you have achieved. Not only did you go on and get your Juris Doctor from Northeastern, but more importantly, you built a beautiful family, including a new addition this year. And now, most importantly, you are assuming the role, this important leadership role, as the 14th senior pastor of the historic 12th Baptist Church. To the clergy, ministerial staff, brothers and sisters, thank you for welcoming me to your convocation. To the electeds, State Representative China Tyler, who deserves so much credit for her leadership on important police reform and criminal justice reform this year. And to TBC's own Kim Janey, our current city council president, soon to be mayor. You were making change long before any of this. Right in this community, you were one of the first people I was told to call back when I was running years ago, and you were kind enough to have a conversation with me. I can't thank you enough for being such an inspiration in government, being such a part of it all. And boy, isn't it thrilling in this moment to see Kim Janey, your Kim Janey, assume this historic position as mayor of the city of Boston. And our dear Congresswoman, talk about somebody who is always in the right place at the right time, offering the right action and the right words. She is a leader across this country, We are so privileged to call her our own. And we wish Ayanna Pressley and her team all the best in the coming days. And we congratulate her on her well-deserved Leadership Award, our dear friend, Ayanna Pressley. And to Lauren, and to Jamil, you're what it's all about. You're why Dr. King did his work. You're why all of us are here. And boy, do we see, and are we able to reap the benefit of all that's been sown, to bring you forward like that, to see what is in front of us in terms of our future. You guys are amazing, and I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for inspiring me and reminding me of what my job is all about. It feels good, so good to be back inside this church today. It feels good to be out of the house. This church, a place that has grounded communities and brought hope and calm during challenging and difficult times. A place that inspires us not just as a city, not just as a state, but for all of you out there as a country. A place that inspires us to do better, to be better, and to make real change. And even though my suit's a little tighter, I don't know if anybody else is feeling that right now in this moment, I am in comfort. I am in comfort because we are in church. We are in church together and connected. To get together and connected in a place that Dr. King called home when he was a student, of course, here in Boston, and where he took with him the wisdom and the words from each Sunday service. Together and connected in a place where Black excellence thrives and Black lives have always mattered. Together and connected in resolve and love, especially after this year and especially after this week. This week, we witnessed an attempted coup by white supremacists. The People's House, the United States Capitol, was violated, desecrated by insurrectionists and traitors. Violated and desecrated by their leader, Donald Trump, and everyone who has been complicit in enabling and furthering his steady and lawless assault on democracy and decency. It was chilling to watch. It was maddening to watch. I know how it must have looked, particularly from your eyes. The appalling, hate-filled, violent taunts, the Confederate flag carried through the halls of that building. Black Capitol staff mopping up the disgraceful destruction and bloodshed left behind by the perpetrators. The bone-chilling scenes of Capitol Police being chased up the stairs by a raging mob, and the police officer screaming for his life, wincing as he's smashed between the front doors. And then the members of Congress scrambling for their gas masks and sheltering in place, including many who time and time again have voted to allow extremists and the RNA to terrorize our communities, our schools, and our public spaces. An assault we've seen play out before, reminiscent of other experiences. Some of you lived through those experiences. Others of us have read about them. They are painful and they are searing. We also saw the racism, didn't we? You know, earlier this year, we all witnessed a multi-generational, multi-ethnic crowd gathering in the District of Columbia to demand an end to racial injustice. They were labeled thugs, and they were met with riot gear, helicopters, the National Guard, and representatives from just about every law enforcement agency available, including some they brought in from the day from Bureau of Prisons just to patrol. Now contrast that with what we saw on Wednesday. Elected officials, and not only Donald Trump. Elected officials sworn to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law, to stand for liberty, justice, and equal treatment, exhorting people that they labeled patriots to storm our nation's capital. And despite the warnings, and there were warnings numerous, of violence, there were no helicopters. There's no National Guard. There's barely a presence that would have been adequate to secure the Boston Garden on a midweek game, let's face it. Let alone a building that has served for ages as a beacon to the world, a symbol of democracy and freedom. You may know this feeling, of course, better than I do. Black churches have been vulnerable, sabotaged by these attacks throughout history. Only a few weeks ago, Black Lives Matter flags were ripped from churches in D.C. and burned. And we don't have to look outside of Massachusetts for examples. In Springfield, following the election of President Barack Obama, the Macedonia Church of God in Christ was doused in gasoline and set on fire. The other day, it was the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Presbyterian Church on Common Terrace in Springfield. So this is raw. This is raw. It is painful. It is wrong. Now, how we got to this place is no mystery. 400 years, 400 plus years of systemic racism, institutionalized racism. It's been well documented, and it affects every single aspect of a Black American's life. It is a fact. I am not going to debate that with anyone. And it's also a fact that from the beginning, there's really been a collective complicity in our country in the perpetuation of white supremacy, aiding, abetting, perpetuating, excusing white supremacy. What do you think we saw manifest the other day? It's a cancer on our democracy, on our freedom, and on Dr. King's vision from the mountaintop. You know, in June of 2015, I spoke at Charles Street AME in the wake, the horrible wake, the aftermath of Mother Emanuel. Remember, some of us were all together. I spoke the words of Matthew that evening. Upon this rock I shall build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against me. I say that again tonight in affirmation. For me, this day, Martin Luther King Jr. Day this year, has an imperative. An imperative. And this year, I'm thinking of his legacy of resistance, economic justice, societal transformation, and I'm thinking more about the oath, yes, the duty, as Congresswoman Presley said, to continue that work in his name. We must safeguard and expand civil rights. We must demand the dismantling of racial justice wherever we find it, in our environment, our health care, housing, employment, educational, the criminal justice system, and beyond. We must end white supremacy once and for all. And see, at this time, I think we have a unique opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Because if we don't do it now, God help this country. God help this world. But we will do it. We're going to take the pain of these two pandemics, COVID-19, new in 2020, and the pandemic of racial injustice, not so new. But with that, we have an opportunity not to build back, not to repair, not to restore, no, but to build forward in new and different ways that rid society of the racial disparities and injustices that have persisted for all too long. We see the toll taken of these twin pandemics in Massachusetts, pandemics that exposed and exacerbated the fragilities in our system. Tonight, families are living paycheck to paycheck, if at all, and don't have savings for rent, utilities, student loan payments, groceries. We've seen a 60% increase in hunger in our state. Massachusetts right now has hunger, food insecurity growing at the fastest rate in the country. Think about that. Small businesses have shuttered or are struggling to stay open. We're facing record job losses and a battling rise in evictions and foreclosures. And children and parents are desperately struggling to do school. Here in the state, where the opportunity and the right to a public education is guaranteed under our state constitution, and we were the home to the first public school in the country, we can do and must do so much better. We know, though, that while so many across this state are suffering, none have been hit harder than our Black and brown and immigrant communities, who are suffering the greatest economic and health consequences. This crisis has exacerbated persistent inequality and discrimination. Much of the federal aid that's out there has not yet reached communities of color, or to the extent it's gotten there, it's not been nearly enough. If we're going to build a more equitable system, we need to first acknowledge that there has been a public health crisis in under-resourced communities long before COVID. But as we enter this year, there is hope, and there will be hope when and if we see vaccines distributed equitably in our communities, when and if we see science, humanity, democracy, and the rule of law working for all of us, when we see history being made, a Baptist preacher and a Morehouse alum like Dr. King become the state's first Black senator. Imagine that. It got lost on some of this week because we immediately, it wasn't even 3 hours old and we saw horrific things happening. But don't let that take anything away from what happened in this country, which was remarkable. The legacy of John Lewis lives on. It lives on. An African-American woman is representing now his congressional district, and the pastor of his own church is representing the state of Georgia. There's hope when Joe Biden is sworn in as the 46th president of the United States, and Kamala Harris is sworn in as the 49th vice president. And our very first Black and South Asian American woman on January 20th. So there is hope. But I just want to tell you, and I'm going to be real honest with you, the last 4 years took a lot of work, right? There are a lot of things that we had to contend with that took time and resources and energy from things that I personally would have liked to have been spending a lot more time on, but it was necessary. And I thank all who joined in that effort to stand for the rule of law, to stand for democracy, but most importantly, to stand for the fundamental value and decency and dignity of every single person, regardless of race, ethnicity, creed, religion. That's what it was about. But here's what I have ahead as your Attorney General. Racial justice, racial equity is the #1 priority for my office, and it will be as long as I serve. And I humbly come before you with humility and acknowledge that we have not done enough, okay? But we have an opportunity now. 2 days after George Floyd's murder, I held an open dialogue conversation, which was interesting, with Zoom and 600 people, but it was powerful. And together, our office decided that we would apply, no matter what division or bureau, wherever you were working. Your job was to apply an equity lens to everything that is done. Who we charge, who we investigate, sentencing recommendations. Are we going to defend that permit that's going to allow another polluting entity into an environmental justice community or not? Everything is going to be done with an intentional application of that equity lens. Because those of us, and you should demand of those of us who serve in government, serve you, nothing less. You know, we did work hard, of course, over the last year to support extraordinary essential workers who kept our state strong, tried to get PPE to people, keep workplaces safe, tried to get unemployment out the door, even though that wasn't really happening well at the state level. We worked hard across the state to get out flyers and advisories and resources in multiple languages about how to avoid scams and illegal evictions, how to fight intimidation and racial harassment, how to provide information on how to access health care, financial assistance, and the like. We worked to provide more grant money to fund more inclusive opioid use recovery, and to promote racial justice and equity in behavioral health services, something not talked about and ignored for far too long. Money from my office directly to those efforts. We continue to partner with community leaders, food banks, food pantries, and nonprofit organizations to address food insecurity and prevent more families from going hungry. We've stepped up our efforts to enforce civil rights laws when people suffer racist attacks by their neighbors or complete strangers. We're combating discrimination in housing and employment and making sure that families aren't kicked out of their homes during this pandemic. And if any of you hear of or know of situations where people are in need, people have been mistreated, I want you to call Reverend Broderick, because he's got my number, okay? You know, we've issued comprehensive reports to help protect environmental justice communities impacted by pollution and to advance key recommendations to reimagine a healthcare system and a public health infrastructure that serves all residents equitably. And we will be working hard to implement police reform. I say all that, and we have done a lot of work this year. I'm proud of the teams in my office. But it is nowhere near enough, and it is nowhere near done. But know that as I stand before you this evening in this beautiful and sacred place, I am more committed than ever to work with you, all of you, to make real, meaningful change in this state. You know, on this day, as I've gone to these events over the years, it is right and common that people talk about Dr. King's life. I want to talk about his death. Think back to February 1968, when 2 African-American sanitation workers, garbage workers in the city of Memphis, were crushed to death in a garbage compactor. Conditions were so bad for these workers. Low wages, no access to restrooms, not even given city uniforms. It was Dr. King who went there to organize those workers. On March 28th, he led a march for fair working conditions. He returned to Memphis on April 3rd to continue to organize. And though his plane was delayed that night because of a bomb threat on his life, he made it, and Lauren delivered from the Mason Temple his "I've been to the mountaintop" speech. Next day, of course, he's assassinated, killed at the Lorraine Motel. The man who won the Nobel Peace Prize, who is a fellow to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, one of the most prestigious honors you can receive, who led the March on Washington and the March from Selma, died organizing garbage workers. That meant something to me. It reminded me of something. It reminded me that Dr. King, as you all know, but I wanted it to bear emphasis, understood the value and the dignity of every life. He also understood that he would do whatever he could do from wherever he was to help the person in front of him, to see the person in front of him. That's what we have to do. If I can help somebody, then my life shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody, my life shall not be in vain. That's what we got to do. In this city, in this state, in this country. All people, especially people in government, but all people. Look around us. See the indignity. See the injustice. And take that on. After 400 years of systemic racism and all of its many vestiges, we sadly have the opportunity to do that in plenty. But it is an opportunity. An opportunity that we must seize now and run with, no matter how tired, how weary, how cynical. We must seize the opportunity. Now, before I conclude, I want to speak to the Black women here and out there who are watching today. Black women have had to bear the burden of this pandemic in ways that no other group has. Black women have gotten sicker. They've held some of the most dangerous and essential jobs. Black women have had to pick up the pieces of our broken child care and caregiving systems. And Black women have had to watch as justice was not delivered for their sons and for their daughters, Breonna Taylor, and so many more. And yet, in the midst of this crisis, it was Black women who delivered the most tremendous electoral feat that we have seen. They have been not just the backbone of electoral politics. Black women have been the backbone of our society from the beginning. Is it any coincidence, folks, that the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement are Black women? Is it any coincidence that Black women drowned out the wave of Trump voters? Is it any coincidence that organizations like the New Georgia Project, Black Voters Matter, and of course Fair Fight are all led by Black women? LaTosha Brown, Nseo Fort, and Stacey Abrams. It was a decade of Black women organizing that flipped Georgia. So when we talk, as we will at the federal, state, and city level in the weeks and the months ahead, let's talk about the need for massive federal investment in our child care industry, better workplace protections, police reform, voting rights, education, funding. But let's do it centering the experiences of Black women, because we can no longer compromise on the needs of Black women. We must follow white, black, alike. We must follow black women. As Stacey Abrams said, now I really mean that, and I think about Stacey Abrams, who I just referenced. I came to know her a few years ago, and she's become a friend, and what she has done is remarkable. But one thing that she said that keeps me going, she says, I'm not optimistic or pessimistic. I'm determined, right? I'm determined. I know I'm going to carry that sentiment with me into 2021. Together, we will fight for what is right and just, and we will not stop. In closing, I would like to bring it back to the words of Dr. King. And I'm thinking about a letter from the Birmingham jail. Remember that letter? That letter written by Dr. King in response to 8 white clergymen who essentially called on black protesters to stop agitating, to be patient, and be quiet. He wrote that letter. Dr. King said this: wait has almost always meant never. Wait has almost always meant never. This is still true. As your Attorney General, I owe you action. I owe you urgency, and I owe you partnership. And I intend to deliver. As I look at the road ahead, I know that our work has never been more important, and I know that we've never been more ready. With the armor of Dr. King's spirit, and the armor of love, and the armor of justice, we will do this, just as Dr. King taught us, together and connected. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.